There exists a mind, tormented and visionary, that forged the darkest philosophy ever written about human pain. Its origin wasn't intellectual, it was maternal. It began in the cold void left by a mother whose affection was withheld like a condemned man's last meal. What if your entire personality, every struggle, every self-doubt wasn't shaped by you, but sculpted by the touch or neglect of a woman who gave you life? That is the terrifying thesis buried within the writings of Arthur Schopenhauer. His genius didn't come from study alone. It was carved into him by heartbreak, indifference, and emotional abandonment so extreme that modern researchers might label it abuse. He wasn't just a philosopher, he was a witness to emotional genocide, and he turned his childhood trauma into theory, into prophecy. A prophecy about male agony, not in the abstract, but in its most intimate form. The kind forged inside a boy whose mother couldn't or wouldn't love him. Picture a small child, Arthur, barely older than 5, standing silently outside his parents' bedroom. His father, a frail and fading man consumed by illness, wheezes into the void. His mother, the celebrated and venomous Johanna Schopenhauer, sits with her back to the door, penning letters to lovers while her son waits unnoticed, a toy soldier trembling in his fingers. She doesn't even look up. That scene, frozen in the marrow of his memory, would later be dissected not with pity, but with the merciless clarity of a surgeon. Arthur wouldn't grow to simply resent her. He would transform her neglect into a philosophy that laid bare a truth no one dared utter. Your mother's absence isn't just painful. It orchestrates your entire psychic architecture. Today we call it attachment theory. He called it betrayal by the life-giving force itself. The feminine hand that should cradle becomes the blade that cleaves. Think back. Not to a boss, not to an ex, but to a moment when an irrational fury gripped you, rage without a name. That wasn't anger, that wasn't stress. That was the ghost of maternal indifference, howling through the catacombs of your unconscious. A modern study from 2007, hidden in clinical language, confirmed what Schopenhauer declared nearly 2 centuries earlier. Boys deprived of warmth before the age of 7 are far more likely to mutate into adult shells, their personalities armored in narcissism or dissociation. Arthur anticipated it before data existed. He once wrote that a boy deprived of tenderness internalizes 2 devastating ideas. First, that he's undeserving of love, and second, that only conquest will make him worthy. That conquest, this compensatory violence, was not metaphor for Schopenhauer. He had lived it. His mother, beloved by literary circles, entertained Goethe while ridiculing her own child in public. When Arthur released his first book, a bold attempt to explain the very logic of existence, she scorned it with a laugh. Unreadable. After that, he never spoke to her again. 2 decades later, her corpse was discovered alone, half consumed by rodents in her extravagant mansion. Arthur's reaction wasn't grief, it was detachment. In his journal, he scribbled a sentence colder than winter. "The will has corrected its error." That line wasn't bitterness, it was liberation. Most men, confronted by maternal apathy, spin tales of forgiveness. Schopenhauer saw through the myth. He understood that such a wound reshapes a man in 3 potential ways. He may implode, numb himself with liquor, gamble away his hope, or choose the rope. He may explode, manipulate, dominate, destroy, or he may evolve, strip away illusion, and confront the machinery that built him. Which have you chosen? You may not recognize the symptoms, but they're there. That hollow sensation after meaningless intimacy, that fury when you're dismissed, that need to prove yourself in money, muscles, or mastery. These aren't flaws, they're programming, installed before you could speak. In 2015, researchers at Harvard found that men with distant mothers were nearly 50% more likely to seek danger just to feel alive. Schopenhauer didn't need MRI scans. He called it rebellion of the will against emotional starvation. But his salvation wasn't psychotherapy. It wasn't romantic love. It wasn't approval. He found refuge in aesthetic beauty, solitude, and brutal self-honesty. He never wore a wedding ring. He never begged for validation. He lived with a dog named Atma, meaning soul in Sanskrit, and wrote his magnum opus alone, ignored, misunderstood, and completely free. Within that work, buried beneath its dense structure and arcane terminology, is a liberation manual for men. It offers a truth most avoid. Her failure was never your fault. Her chains were ancient, her silence inherited. The gift of being unloved is that no one can ever manipulate you with affection again. Yet Schopenhauer's infamous contempt for women wasn't just hostility, it was clarity. He suspected that what women truly feared wasn't hatred, it was indifference. In private notes, never meant for public eyes, he scratched a sentence that pulses like a live wire. Women don't love men, they love potential, and they despise what men become. This wasn't incel rage. This was a man describing a pattern he'd watched his whole life. Johanna Schopenhauer didn't simply ignore Arthur. She studied him with a detached cruelty, as if he were an experiment that failed to become what she imagined. From that gaze, he extracted a principle. A woman nurtures what could be, but often resents what is. And if you've ever been adored when broke and dismissed when successful, you know this truth. The girl who clung to you when you were dreaming grows cold once you arrive. The mother who smiled at your shyness as a child scorns your power as a grown man. He called it the maternal paradox, a biological algorithm that praises promise but punishes fulfillment. Even modern psychology agrees. Studies show that ambitious men are initially seen as attractive until their ambition threatens to shift the balance of power. Then admiration curdles into fear. History proves it. Friedrich Nietzsche, Schopenhauer's philosophical descendant, yearned his whole life for feminine affirmation. Instead, he was devoured by it. His mother drowned him in guilt. His sister mutilated his legacy. And Lou Salome, the woman he idolized, turned his pain into a thesis. Nietzsche died broken, his mind consumed by madness. But long before he collapsed on that Turin street, weeping into the mane of a horse, he echoed Schopenhauer's warnings. "Go to women," he wrote, "but don't forget the whip." The irony. By the time he realized the truth, it was far too late. They already held the reins. Schopenhauer, unlike Nietzsche, escaped the trap. He didn't hate women. He refused to be ruled by them. He never bowed to romance. Instead, he transformed isolation into armor. He wrote, "A man who can bear solitude understands the horror of being desired." That isn't bitterness. That's sovereignty. Most men falsely assume that because women rely on men, financially, emotionally, socially, that they value them. But dependence doesn't equal devotion. It breeds resentment. And from resentment blooms cruelty. Just ask Ludwig II of Bavaria, the romantic monarch who built castles and lived inside operas. His mother raised him on fairy tales, only to recoil when he tried to live them. By middle age, he was bankrupt, paranoid, and hallucinating conversations with imaginary knights. His mother signed the papers that declared him insane. Days later, he was found floating in a lake, face down, his pockets filled with scribbled fantasies. The official story said suicide. The truth? He drowned in the illusion his mother gave him. Schopenhauer would have whispered, "Of course." He warned that the child raised on dreams becomes the man crushed by reality. But here's where most men fail. They confuse disgust with weakness. They think rejecting the feminine mythos makes them heartless. Schopenhauer wasn't afraid of women. He didn't curse them. He studied them clinically and without apology. He once said that women are the second sex, across the board, not to belittle, but to warn. Treat them as such, and paradoxically, they respect you more. Modern women don't want to be worshipped. They want power to lean on. When you grovel for their approval, you force them to look down, and no one admires what lies beneath their feet. So what's the answer? Don't chase love. Don't declare war on it either. Choose power, but not the cheap power of muscles or bank accounts. Choose the indifference of a man who cannot be manipulated because he desires nothing they can offer. When a woman tried to charm him at a gathering in Frankfurt, Schopenhauer simply replied, "I have no interest in your affection or your body." Most men hear that and think, how lonely. But he wasn't lonely. He was untouchable. That's the paradox. Women don't fear hatred. They fear irrelevance. They panic when your world stops orbiting around them. Think back to the last woman who ignored you. The ache you felt wasn't heartbreak. It was ego death, the realization that her opinion meant more than it should. Schopenhauer teaches that real liberation isn't about being wanted. It's about becoming so complete within yourself that no rejection stings. So ask yourself now, are you still a boy, hoping your mother or her surrogate will finally turn to you with love in her eyes? Or are you ready to alchemize her silence into your own autonomy? Because beyond the theories, beyond the bitterness, beyond the war of the sexes, there's something far more terrifying and powerful awaiting those who dare to walk where Schopenhauer walked. And that's what we explore next. How to transmute your agony, not into isolation or pity, but into something so dangerous, so irreversible, that even the will itself trembles at your awakening. There's a legend about Schopenhauer, one of those stories that never found its way into polite academic biographies. It takes place in Berlin, 1831. A disease spreads like fire through the city, cholera. Corpses rot in doorways, and the air reeks of vinegar and burnt lye. Families flee. Doctors collapse from exhaustion. But Schopenhauer, stone-faced, stays, not to help, not to pray, to watch, to observe the last illusion, the mask of civilization, peel away in real time. He walks alone through emptied alleys. He sees priests sprinting from their dying congregations, mothers abandoning sick children, lovers locking each other out with trembling hands. And as the infected beg and scream, he scribbles in his journal, "Finally, I see humanity as it truly is, a panicked beast, clawing at shadows in the dark." To some, that sounds like a man who's given up. But look closer. He wasn't retreating into despair. He was stripping the world down to its bones. This was not nihilism. It was X-ray vision. And he didn't stop at observing others. He turned that same ruthless lens inward. While others mourned or preached, he dissected pain itself. See, Schopenhauer didn't believe suffering was accidental. He saw it as the raw material of transformation. Most people flinch from discomfort, treating it like a mistake in the simulation, something to sedate with pills, drown in sex, silence with distractions. Schopenhauer saw the opposite. He saw agony as a crucible. He lived by one law: life is anguish. The only decision that matters is what you do with it. Will you let it rot you from the inside, or will you forge a sword from the fire? Let's be clear. This isn't metaphor. Let me show you a man who followed that path to the end. In the winter of 1944, a young Jewish psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl was marched through the gates of Auschwitz. His manuscript stolen, his wife already murdered in a gas chamber. He stood naked, freezing, anonymous among thousands. But somewhere in that frozen hell, he found a thought that changed everything. They can take everything, he realized, except my ability to choose how I interpret this moment. Years later, that insight became the core of his book, Man's Search for Meaning. But Schopenhauer had already lived that same revelation 100 years earlier, not in a camp, but in solitude. He wasn't surrounded by barbed wire. His cage was philosophical. He didn't lose his wife. He never sought one. Each morning, Arthur climbed into freezing water, not to suffer, but to train. It wasn't sadism. It was immunization. By embracing discomfort daily, he built a tolerance, not just to cold, but to disappointment, to rejection, to mortality. His body grew used to shock. His mind became flame-resistant. He wrote for 12 hours, uninterrupted, through hunger and silence and obscurity. He wasn't waiting to be discovered. He didn't need a publisher's praise. He'd already burned away the craving for validation. He wasn't writing for the world. He was writing to expose the machinery behind it. Modern science now trails behind his steps. A 2018 pain study showed that people who expose themselves voluntarily to stress, cold showers, intense endurance, discomfort, build psychological immunity. Breakups don't break them. Rejection doesn't rattle them. Loss doesn't destroy them. Schopenhauer predicted that 2 centuries ago. But here's where the masses fall short. They believe resilience means gritting your teeth and enduring. But that's merely tolerating torment. Schopenhauer saw something else, something more dangerous. True strength is not surviving pain. It's using it as fuel. Let me give you an example that history forgot. Tusan Louvur, the man who led Haiti's revolt. He was born in chains, beaten for learning to read, scarred before adolescence, but he didn't sink into victimhood. He studied the enemy, his masters, their laws, their habits. He twisted their tactics back on them like a poisoned blade. When Napoleon sent legions to crush him, Toussaint's soldiers, formerly whipped slaves, fought like demons. Why? Because they weren't afraid of agony. They had lived in it so long that it became their strength. Schopenhauer would have nodded in grim approval. Like Toussaint, he was ignored, ridiculed, humiliated. He buried a suicidal father. He endured a mother who belittled his very essence. He sold fewer than 200 copies of his life's work in his youth. But he never crumbled. He didn't endure suffering. He refined it into steel. He once wrote, "The genius is he who ignites his own fire, burns, and from the ashes grows wings." That's not poetry. That's a manual. Most men avoid the fire. They beg for someone else's heat. They sit in the shadow of others' accomplishments, hoping to be warmed. Then, when the frost arrives, they die in silence, cold and confused. But watch what happens when a man embraces his own burning. In the 1950s, a broken ex-painter named William S. Burroughs accidentally shot his wife in a drunken stunt. Acquitted, devastated, and addicted to heroin, he fled to North Africa, locked himself in a moldy room, and wrote 18 hours a day. From that descent emerged Naked Lunch, a book so unfiltered it was banned in Boston. Asked later why he didn't kill himself, Burroughs simply said, "Because I still want to see how it ends." Schopenhauer would have called this the will's rebellion turned inward. That's the secret. If you don't ascribe meaning to your pain, it devours you. If you transmute it into creation or insight, you become unbreakable. The tragedy of modern men isn't that they suffer more. It's that they mistake their agony as pathology, not power. Every diagnosis, depression, anxiety, ADHD, may be real, but they've also become profit centers. Symptoms have been branded. Sadness is now a market, despair a subscription. Pain has been domesticated, turned into a customer service call. But in Schopenhauer's world, There was no hotline, only the choice to sink or sharpen. So how do you sharpen? First, stand still. Don't numb the ache, don't swipe it away. Don't tweet your sadness into digital confetti. Sit, let it bite. Let the embarrassment, the grief, the failure eat through your skin. Stay conscious. Stay unguarded. That's the first gate. Then introduce ritual, not the fake affirmational kind, real bodily hardship, cold showers, silent mornings, rejected comforts, not to suffer, but to detach. In 2021, a neuroscience journal confirmed that men who exposed themselves to voluntary discomfort showed literal changes in the brain's stress centers. And here's the final key, the one most never hear. Stop asking what your pain means. There is no why. There is no personal mythology hidden in the bruises. Searching for meaning turns you into a martyr. Schopenhauer never wrote to heal his wounds. He wrote because truth had to be spoken. Full stop. That's why his disciples Nietzsche, Jung, Wittgenstein didn't tell men to find peace. They told them to fall in love with fate, not because fate is kind, because it's real, and real is better than comfort. So are you still praying for a softer life? Still hoping your tears will unlock meaning? Or are you finally ready to do what Schopenhauer did? Stand naked in your own personal Berlin plague, watching the lies die and the core remain? Because this is where things go beyond the pain, past the philosophy. Here lies the escape hatch from this biological prison, not another trick, not a motivational gimmick, a practice Schopenhauer used to silence the will forever. There's a moment. Every man meets it. Might be at 2 a.m. after meaningless sex, or in a grey conference room as colleagues pretend to care about graphs and goals. It's that sudden horrible clarity. None of this matters. Most men distract themselves back to sleep. Schopenhauer didn't. He went deeper. At 26, he found a Latin copy of the Upanishads, ancient Indian texts that dismantle ego like acid eats flesh. While other thinkers debated church politics or ethics, Schopenhauer stared into Eastern mysticism and saw the bomb under Western reality. The self is fake. Your identity is theatre, and your suffering is the friction of clinging to a role. In 1980, a Harvard neuroscientist named Herbert Benson visited Himalayan monks. What he saw blew apart Western assumptions. The monks could raise body temperature with breath, sit naked in snow and dry, wet sheets with skin heat, slow heart rate to near death. When asked how, they said, "We stop being the person who is cold." That's it. That's the doorway. Schopenhauer called it denial of the will. Not suicide, not repression, but ego disassembly, not through drugs, through brutal observation. Every time you're humiliated, mocked, discarded, notice the pain, then ask, to whom does this pain belong? Search for the person inside the reaction. You won't find him. Try it now. Remember your last rejection. Feel it. Then ask, who is feeling this? Watch as the emotion unravels, not because it fades, but because it has no owner. This is what Schopenhauer pulled from the Upanishads. The eye cannot see itself. The mind cannot observe its root. You are not the pain. You are the space it moves through. The most dangerous men in history found this space. Miyamoto Musashi, who survived 60 life or death duels, said, "In battle, become the void. When the sword swings, there is no warrior, only motion. Flow state, neuroscience calls it. Schopenhauer called it the temporary death of the will. You can't force it. You can't want it. Wanting is will. It arrives only when you forget to want. That's why self-help is a trap. It packages transcendence as a goal. The joke? The will can't kill itself by willpower. So what did Schopenhauer do instead? Every morning, plunge into ice water, not to cleanse, but to destabilize the ego. Then 3 hours of focused writing. No outcome, no plan, just raw excavation. At noon, he played the flute, not to entertain, but to disappear. Then he walked his dog, not for fitness, but to watch a creature unburdened by introspection. Nowhere in that day, mantras, goals, motivational quotes, just action without narrative. A 2023 Stanford study showed that people who engage in pure doing, process without expectation, deactivate the default mode network, the part of the brain that maintains the idea of I. In short, they vanish. That's the punchline. Men chase purpose like it's a treasure map. But Schopenhauer knew. Purpose is the will's final trick. The monk's drying sheets aren't fulfilled. The samurai in combat isn't self-actualized. They are empty. And in that emptiness, free. So now comes the choice. You can keep chasing what the world has dangled, titles, love, validation, or you can do what Schopenhauer did, sit in the quiet, feel the burn, question every desire, dissect every emotion, not to become enlightened, but to escape. Every time lust hits, ask who's lusting. Every time rage rises, demand, where is the one who's angry? The answers won't comfort you. They'll hollow you out. And if you persist, they'll liberate you. Because Schopenhauer's final truth was never metaphysical. It was mechanical. The self isn't a being, it's a process. And processes can be interrupted. The final question is, do you have the courage to turn off the machine?